Okay, welcome everyone to the webinar. My name is Aarti and I'm representing Youth Alliance at the moment. For us, the intention of this webinar is in many layers, but one is that we have been really talking about a lot of things. Matlab, I will also be speaking in a mix of Hindi and English, just sharing that beforehand. So there's a lot going on across the across the country, outside here, be it war, be it inequality, be it climate crisis, be it a lot of conflicts related to gender, caste, and these days a lot of conflicts around language too. If you have come across any news like that, और इतना कुछ जब हो रहा है, there's also a lot of overwhelms that one engages with, a lot of questions, a lot of कि whatever we are doing, is it even worth it? जो भी हम कर रहे हैं, क्या वो मायने भी रखता है? Is it even important to do and act? Or how do we even respond? I was just listening to my own voice. Okay. Or how do we even respond? Or whenever we engages with all these questions, it becomes really difficult to look at the side of hope. What is hope then? What does one look to, like, believe that change is not something which is far distant, transformation is not something which is a distant thing, but how can we even look that it is possible? It is possible by people like you and me, by people like, by an ordinary people, to, like, at least contribute in the idea and in the execution of change. And with that in mind, we also have a program which is called Earth Shastra that's going to come up in September, where we also sit together with these questions, with the questions of what's crisis, what is this crisis, which we are talking about, be it climate change, inequality, war, polarization, and how can we engage in those questions, not from a point of reacting, but from a point of respond, from a point of coming together to, like, really look or relook to what actually is the crisis. And with that in mind, we thought, how not do a webinar or an online mentor circle with Ashish to, like, really learn about from his work. Um, so if you might have heard about Ashish beforehand, but I'll be introducing you again, Ashish. Uh, Ashish is an environmentalist, a writer, an activist, a bird watcher, a doodler, and many, many more tags to it. He has been working through his work of Kalpavriksh, Vikalp Sangam, and Global Tapestry of Alternatives. He has really documented hundreds and hundreds of grassroots experiments that's happening across in India and across. These experiments are hope to, in a way, a hope to or a response to the crisis of our times. Uh, he has he's also okay. He has also been part of different boards and different panels where a discussion around climate and ecological wisdom has been spoken about. For us in Youth Alliance, he has been a mentor for a long time now. Even in our last, or Archa seventh edition, I think he came and stayed with us for 2 days to, like, really guide us about what the what can we as youth do or look forward to. And so we decided to invite Ashish, who has walked more than us, who has walked a longer path, who has been working in this sector for about decades, if I'm correct with the numbers. And our intention is to learn from him and his own journey. With that in mind, the one thing that I would, like, really request, if possible, can you please turn, like, it's a strong invitation, if you can turn on your videos, it will give us a sense of what's happening, like, क्या हो रहा है, ये नामों से ज्यादा चेहरों से समझ में आता है कि क्या हो रहा है आपके लिए जब आप बात कर रहे हैं, जब आप सुन रहे हैं. But yeah, if possible, please do put your videos on. Thank you. Uh, and I will pass it to Ashish now.
Thank you, Aarti. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Aarti, Shipra, and everybody else in Youth Alliance for this opportunity. So I think we have about an hour and 20 minutes or something like that left, right? So let me get straight into the presentation and then we'll open it up. I hope to finish in about half an hour or 35 minutes. Then we can open it up for a longer discussion. And just to say right in the beginning that the issues I will speak about are, of course, very complex. So trying to deal with them in half an hour is obviously going to be very simplistic in many ways. But maybe in the discussion, we can go a bit deeper and add more nuances to it. But also, if somebody from the audience wants to carry on the discussion later, then please feel free to do that. I'll add my email ID here, and I'll also be giving a lot of references in the presentation and later in the chat, so you can go deeper into the subjects that I deal with. Okay, so with that, visible. Okay, so like Aarti said, we are wherever we are in the world, we're going through all kinds of multiple crises. Things seem to be getting from bad to worse. Every day in the news, if we happen to make the mistake of opening the newspaper or listening to a news channel, then it's basically a lot of depressing news. And so let me just give you a very quick a minute on my own journey till now. It's been about almost 50 years now, actually, since the time I was in high school, studying in Delhi, growing up in Delhi, and seeing the city actually getting really bad to worse in terms of pollution and congestion and so on. One of the things that we took up at that point in time, we used to do a lot of bird watching and nature watching in the Delhi Ridge Forest, which is the last part of the Aravalli, one of the largest city forests in the world. And but we realized that it was being destroyed for all kinds of urbanization. So we, as students, we actually said we should take this up as an issue, and we did. We did a whole year's campaign, including street demonstrations, giving petitions to the lieutenant governor, and so on and so forth. And over a year's campaigning, I actually managed to get them to declare it protected. So most of it is still there, though it's always under threat. This was one of our earliest actions. And then we also realized that, in fact, one of the reasons why we took that action was because we'd already heard of ecological and livelihoods based actions from different parts of the country. One of the most famous being the Chipko movement. I'm sure you all heard of it, of women, especially in the villages in Garhwal and Kumaon, protecting their forests. So we decided that instead of just hearing about it, we should actually go and visit. So we did two padyatras, foot marches through the area where the Chipko women were active, just to learn what was happening, why were the women doing what they were doing. And that's when we actually also realized the connections between environment, so-called development, and issues, gender issues, like who's taking decisions for whom, cultural connections between people and forests, and many other things. Then in 1983, while I was in college, and a number of us were in college or just out of college, we decided to also do a long walk along the Narmada Valley, because we had heard of this proposal for 30 big dams to come up in the valley, and for hydroelectricity and irrigation and so on. So we thought we should go and see what was happening there. We'd already heard about some local movements that were taking place. So we did this 50-day walk, walking, boating, busing from the mouth to the source. And we increasingly kind of learned, to our dismay, that what was being called development was actually, at least for local people, for the river, for wildlife, was also displacement and destruction. So that led us, in those first few years, it led us to this question of, is what we are doing really development, or is it destruction? And if it is more destruction than development, then what really would or should development be? So that's just a very quick glimpse of my journey. And from that, kind of the question of what could really, not development, I don't call it that anymore, but what could really well-being, human well-being be? And I'll come back to that. Okay, so let's look at India. Now, in the name of development, we have, of course, grown enormously. India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world over the last 2, 3, 4 decades. And now I think, in fact, the fourth largest economy in the world. So if you look at all the normal indicators of development, we seem to be doing reasonably well. And this is not a this process or this mindset of development is not just there in economists and people who are taking decisions in New Delhi. It is actually there in a very large section of population, because for the last many decades, this is what's been sold to us, that development is bigger, faster, glitzier, etc., right? And it's about money, and it's about material possessions. It's about more and more consumption. That's what has been actually brainwashed into us so much that we tend to believe that it's kind of almost, for those of us who believe in God, let's say it's God given, or that it's like you can't, it's like oxygen. How can you do without development? So that's the extent to which it has actually been sold to us. But there is the other side of it, which is what we see. Those of us who are concerned or worried about what's happening to the natural environment, what's happening to people who depend on the natural environment, what's happening to cultures, and so on, we actually realize that this flip side, which is about devastation, destruction, displacement, dispossession, is as real as the so called benefits are, right? So here you see an ad from about 35, 40 years back, talking about how nature is a barrier and it has to be uprooted in order for pipelines to be laid. So this is like a symbol of what development not just was 35, 40 years back, still is, though today it is couched in much more politically appropriate ways of sustainable development and things like that, right? It's not just the environment, forests and wildlife are there, but also people who are dependent on forests, like Adivasis, for instance, or fishing communities, or farmers, or craftspersons, small scale manufacturers, who also get dispossessed and displaced in this process. So I actually call it a move from livelihoods to deadlihoods. And that's a term that I can explain later if somebody's interested. Globally, we see that this process of development, which is based on more and more and more economic growth, which means more and more and more material consumption and energy consumption and throughput, is unsustainable. You cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. That should be a very basic thing. Even a third standard kid should be able to tell us. But unfortunately, most governments and economists still seem to they're not actually blind to this. They know about it, but they're ignoring the fact that we do have limits. So that image that you see there is actually what is called the planetary limits or planetary boundaries. And red means we have actually crossed most of the planetary boundaries. In fact, this figure is also now old. It's not only three, but I think only two of the limits which are still which have not yet been crossed. But everything else has been crossed, which means we are already unsustainable on this planet. We're using 1.5 times the resources that we have available to us. And of course, one of the biggest impacts is the climate crisis, which we are seeing. It's not coming anymore, it's already here. We are seeing it every day in our lives, whether it's wildfires, it's droughts, it's floods, it's unusual rainfall patterns, it is the drying up of glaciers, it is extreme heat conditions. We see that we've just seen that in the summer that has gone or still there. And some people are now actually calling this terricide, which means the destruction of the earth, the mass destruction of the earth. Now, connected to this, and this is very important, the ecological collapse and crisis that we are seeing as a result of development is also connected to the growing inequality that we have. This is, of course, all over the world, but if you just look at India now, over the last 30 years, inequality has grown, it has not reduced. We're now 1% of the rich are owning 40% of its wealth, which enables billionaires to become trillionaires. But a lot of poor people, 30, 40, 50% of people actually are more or less stagnant, because even if they might be earning a bit more, they're spending way much more to be able to even just get basic needs like food and water and energy and housing. And finally, and this is also equally important, that the same processes of development, as they get, when you have a mindset which says growth at any cost, and that's a mindset that is pushed by powerful government forces and private corporations, then anybody who dissents, who asks questions, who wants to defend their own territory against destruction, their forest against being taken away, etc., is going to be called anti-development, nuisance, and increasingly anti-national, terrorists, seditionists, etc., etc. So many of us have actually been called some term or the other, and new terms keep getting invented by those who profit from this process of development. So these are all crises that we are facing here in India, but also elsewhere around the world. From very personal crises, for instance, of things like alienation from the rest of nature, from each other, other people, and from ourselves, spiritual crises, to the global crisis of climate and others. And the intersections of these are very, very important. We should keep these in mind when I talk about the sort of ways out also. Okay, that's about the crisis. I'm not going to go more into that. It's the sort of latter part of the day, and I think this is not a time to get more depressed. We won't be able to sleep tonight. So I'm leaving it there, but we can come back to it in the discussion if you want. Now, the question that arises is that if our analysis of the crisis is correct, that we are in real deep trouble, then is there a way out? Are there other forms by which human needs and aspirations can be met without causing these sorts of problems? And that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of my presentation. Now, one of the ways out, or one of the sort of alternatives to this, is resistance itself. People saying, no, we've had enough. We're not going to take this lying down. We will not accept our forest being taken away, or our river being dammed, and our villages being displaced. So this image is one of my favorite images. This is from about 40 years back, of demonstration by 300 Adivasi villages in central India against two very big dams, my hydroelectricity projects, and which they successfully stopped, by the way. And in their articulation, it was very interesting. They were saying we have 300 villages being displaced by this dam. We have all of our forests that are going to be drowned. We don't want that. But also that this river, which for you is a commodity from which you produce electricity, for us it's our mother. She is our mother. How can we allow our mother to be destroyed in this manner, right? So it's two very different conceptions of what is nature and what is our relationship with the rest of nature. I'm taking you now to South Africa. I was in this territory a few months back, which is the territory of the Amadiba indigenous people. And there they have been defending their territory. It was one of the most beautiful areas of South Africa, extremely biologically diverse and culturally diverse. For the last 20 years, they have been defending it against proposed mining, oil and gas exploration in the sea, and a whole bunch of other so-called development projects. Why are they doing it? Because they say that for us, our wealth is our land. We cannot and will not give it. For us, the ocean is where our ancestors live. We cannot allow oil and gas exploration by Shell Corporation and anybody else to take place there. And they say, you say we are poor, but we're not. We have land. How can we be poor? So again, very different conceptions of what it means to be poor or rich, or what it means to be with and within nature. In India, back here, we've had many youth art campaigns against what people consider destructive projects. And if you take all of these and many, many others around the world of resistance movements, what they are actually saying is not just no to particular projects or to the forces of destruction, but also in some senses they're articulating other ways of relating to nature and ourselves, each other, other ways of knowing, other ways of being, other ways of acting, other ways of dreaming, compared to what our dominant system tells us. And why this is important is because the same forces, whether it's capitalism or state domination or patriarchy or whatever, and today the model of development, which have created the crisis, such as, for instance, the climate crisis, are telling us, oh, don't worry, we have the solutions. We'll do massive geoengineering all over the globe. We will have green growth instead of gray growth, and things like that. So we'll do carbon trading or we'll do net zero, which means somebody can keep emitting carbon somewhere else, but we'll try and fix it somewhere else. So these sorts of market solutions or technical solutions, some of them may be useful, but by and large, they're not going to help us to solve the problem because they don't deal with the fundamental roots of the problem, which are the forces, the structures that I have mentioned earlier. And a classic example of that is electric cars. The whole world is switching to or trying to switch to electric cars, including in India. It's a big push. And it's sort of waved around like a magic wand as a solution for climate change, but it's not. electric car might, simply from the point of view of using less or no fossil fuels, or less actually, not no, because even electricity mostly in India comes from fossil fuels, but less, okay, and less emissions. But then, in fact, the ecological damage caused by the mining that is needed for the materials is much more. So, and plus, of course, so it's only the very rich that can afford it if I'm talking about private electric vehicles. So it's not really a solution. And in the last few years, the kind of budgets that we've had in India are also, in a sense, what, it's very much like the double speak that I mentioned, whether it's carbon trading, etc. So they talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat and self-reliance, but in the name of that, coal mining in central India is being expanded. Of course, there's also a huge push for renewable energy, but most of that is mega projects, which are also causing further displacement and taking away of land or destruction of wildlife habitats. Um, and a whole bunch of other things which I don't want to get into. So we have to really be able to interrogate, question, and challenge the so-called solutions that the mainstream system is giving us, which leads us to the question of, okay, what then really are the solutions? And here is where over the last few years we've been documenting hundreds of stories in India, and or uploading hundreds of stories that others are writing in India, but also elsewhere in the world, on a whole range of things, from basic needs to gender justice to radical democracy governance to urban sustainability to many different kinds of things. And other partners are doing this also in different parts of the world. I'll speak a little bit about that book at the end. So in the next few minutes, I'll just give a quick glimpse of some of these stories. Now, please remember that these stories, some of them are hundreds of years old, some of them are 30, 40, 50 years old. So when I deal with them in 1 minute, you will understand that I'm being very, very simplistic about them. But all of them have good documentation, case studies, so you can look them up. I have been inspired by this. This is probably the most inspiring example for me in the last 40, 45 years. This comes from 5,000 Dalit women farmers in Telangana who till about 30, 35 years back faced extreme situations of hunger, malnutrition, social ostracization, no access to health and education, and so on, till they started organizing themselves into women sanghas, Mahila Sanghams in about 60, 70 villages, and a federation called DDS, Deccan Development Society. And they started wondering why they should go down the road of green revolution, which means hybrid seeds and chemical fertilizers and pesticides and dependence on governments and corporations. Why not bring back their traditional seeds and try and see whether they could get food security through that, which they did. Cutting a long story short, but they brought back about 70, 80 different species and varieties of traditional millets, especially also rice and others, pulses. They did a lot more collective farming. They shared seeds, they shared knowledge. And through all of that, they actually now have full food security in these 5,000 plus families. And beyond that, also what they call food sovereignty, which means full control over everything to do with food, the seeds, the knowledge, the land, the water, etc. The women also fought for land rights, which is very unusual in India. Most land is in the name of men, and a whole bunch of other things. Then they moved into having their own media unit, which includes a community. India's first community radio station was started by them, and they make films. They ran for a while. They ran their own school, and many, many, many other things. I could speak for 3 hours just on this initiative. Um, okay, then up into central India. There was a village in about 40 years back called Mindhalekha who started struggling on issues of forest rights and a whole bunch of other things, an Adivasi village. And at some point, they declared that the decisions to be taken in or for the village must be taken by the village. So they actually have a slogan: we elect the government in New Delhi and Bombay, but in our village, we are the government. हमारे गांव में हम ही सरकार. Okay. And inspired by that, another 90 villages in Gadchiroli, in Maharashtra, have also declared this kind of tribal self-rule, Adivasi Swashasan or Swaraj. And but they also realize that internally also they have to make changes, because even in Adivasi society, which is much more equality driven than non-Adivasi society. Nevertheless, women are not often part of decision making, political decision making. So the women fought for equal rights, for having a voice in the Gram Sabhas. And then they made this federation of 90 Gram Sabhas so that a much larger area could be self-governed, where they could protect the forest, they could protect their livelihoods, enhance their livelihoods, try and bring in some of their own education principles, protect their culture and identity, and so on. Um, Out of India, a few examples. So, if one is talking about self governance, maybe the world's most famous example is the Zapatista in what is today called Mexico, where a fairly large region of indigenous peoples have declared autonomy, not independence, not secession, but autonomy, and said that in our region, we will be the ones taking decisions on what to do. And they laid out a whole bunch of principles on how this will be much more democratic, how every citizen will have a right to participate and the capacity to participate, where women, especially, in fact, will be at the forefront, and where we will work with the earth. That is to say, bringing in ecological principles. A similar one, but in much more troubled area, is the Kurdish women's movement in Central Western Asia. You can see in the map here, this is one of the most troubled areas of the world, constantly in conflict with millions of people having to flee from there. But here in this region, which you see colored there in reddish, is where the Kurdish movement has tried to create a zone of peace and ecological living. Nowhere near perfect, because they're constantly under attack by all the nation states there within, especially Turkey. And right now, you know, the sort of what's been happening there in terms of bombing by Israel and things like that. So it's a region in trouble. But despite all of that, if you find there's a lot of material available on how they're actually living, trying to live much more democratically, much more ecologically sustainably. Back in India, we know that for most parts of India, including in villages, traditional occupations will no longer be enough. Uh, or that in fact many people in the younger generations don't necessarily want to carry on these traditional occupations. So we also have to look at hybrids, where you can build on the traditional occupations, build on land-based occupations, craft-based occupations, but also bring in new things like tourism. Okay, community-led tourism, not mainstream hotelier, and tour operator-led tourism. And so these are some examples in the Himalaya of where young people or women have taken over the governance and management of tourism. So the revenues come into the village, and the visitors get a wonderful experience, which is much, much more rich, culturally rich and ecologically rich than if you were to simply go and stay in a standard hotel and eat pizza. So there's many examples of this also now in different parts of India. Let's go to another continent, in Europe. This is from Germany and Greece and Luxembourg, areas which have become extremely capitalist, and through that process extremely individualistic. So one of the biggest crises that the Western world is facing right now is individual personal alienation, right? Of all kinds, and it has all sorts of manifestations in terms of depression and so on. So here are attempts by people to kind of bring back community life, and through that run institutions, whether it's businesses, factories, schools, etc., childcare, through relationships of caring and sharing, not only commercial relationships. I'm not going to go into all the examples here, we don't have the time, but this ranges from community-led schools, which run on what they call time banking, where the surrounding community gives a lot of free time to the school, to communes where everybody pitches in all their income at the beginning of the year, and the whole community has access to that income, to worker run factories where there's no capitalist owner, and a lot more. Back here in India, another urban example, because we can't only be talking about rural transformations, cities also have to transform. So this is a small town, but it has a lot of interesting implications for the big cities also. This is Bhuj in Kutch, where over the last about 11, 12 years, a program called Homes in the City, run by 5 civil society groups with the civic administration, has created, in slum areas especially, created much more dignified housing, self-governance of things like water and waste and energy. And through all of that, actually having people in cities having much greater voice in the budgeting and the planning of the city than normally actually is the case, right? Even in relatively well-to-do colonies, in some places at least, people are beginning to wake up to their responsibility to much more, sustainable living. So examples of zero waste, examples of communities that do complete water recycling and waste recycling, or the revival of urban wildlife habitats like this lake in Bangalore called Kaikondrahalli, and many more. We During the COVID pandemic, one of the things that we found, which was very interesting, was that while there was sort of the economy had collapsed, health was in serious crisis all across the world, there were some communities that seemed to be not just surviving but thriving through that. And so we were wondering why. So we documented or helped to document 100 examples, mostly from India, but also about 30, 40 from outside India, of why this was the case. Why was a community able to take care of its health and its economy much better than somewhere else? And we found things like much more community engagement, community institutions of decision making that were already there or were quickly set up, health practices that were brought back in or had survived from earlier, access to local economic resources, localization of trade and exchange so that you didn't have to do long distances, and a whole lot more. There were some amazing lessons that we learned from these of what it would mean to have communities that could be much more resilient in the face of disasters. Finally, a couple of other sectors, and then I'll come to the last 5-6 minutes, is um, the sector of education. Now, Youth Alliance is one of those groups which has been doing amazing work in alternative education, right? And there are many others. And if you look at what that means, it means that instead of this, what is there in 95% of India's schools and colleges, which is, you have to learn exactly the same thing and you have to sort of spit it out in the exams and then pass on and then basically try and get a job in a corporate sector or government or whatever. It's all laid out. It's part of the rat race. Um, and it's all head, just the head. So people are not even learning how to use their hands or their heart. Of course, values are nowhere in the picture. So these are examples of alternative educational or learning institutions in India and elsewhere that are trying to bring back that creativity, to bring back a complete body experience in education and learning, to bring back learning with nature, to bring back learning with the community around you, and to have your own creativity being enhanced and expressed rather than somebody else's idea of what's creative and what is, and all of this through joy and fun, and not just not boring classrooms that we otherwise unfortunately have. And when I Okay, somebody's having fun with drawing. That's nice. So when I one of the things I really like doing is going back to original meanings of words, and I found that the word school comes from the Greek schole, which means learning with leisure. Okay, I don't know how many of you would have gone into schools or colleges where you learned with leisure. I didn't. And finally, the arena of media and technology, today completely under either government or corporate control, including the platform we're using right now. And so how do we create alternatives for that? And again, there's lots of examples all over the world of people trying to create or run or democratize technologies and media and communications. For instance, free open software. A lot of platforms now, things like Blue Sky instead of Twitter, where people are trying to say that no, these will be under the control of people who are using it rather than under some private capitalist control where they're basically making money and where all of our data is going into the hands of corporations so that they can manipulate us even more. Okay, let me now move to the last part and finish it quickly, which is looking at
last part.
Looking at what kind of, so these are all examples, and I can go on and on and on with examples. I love stories. But from there, moving into, okay, what would be an alternative framework of transformation, which could meet human aspirations and needs, right? So in the Vikalp Sangam process, which I'll quickly describe at the end, in the last 10, 12 years, we have been using what we call this flower of transformation to say that changes that are taking place on the ground, the examples I gave and many more, and what more needs to take place are in five spheres: the political, the economic, social, cultural, and ecological, right? We don't have the time to go into this in detail, but at the core of this is also a set of ethics and values. So, very quickly, running through some key issues. If you remember the examples I gave you of Mindhalekha and Zapatista and Kurdish, it is that they are saying that democracy is not about elections. That's a Western false sense of democracy. Democracy is about us being in control, us being decision makers wherever we are, in a village, in an urban neighborhood, in our school, in whatever collectivity that we are in. And if there is a government, then making the government accountable to us rather than us being like, going, please, 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 sir, can you please pass my bill kind of thing, which is unfortunately what we have now. This also means going beyond current political boundaries. This is a very complex topic, so let me not get there, but basically also challenging the boundaries that are cutting rivers, that are cutting mountain ecosystems, that are cutting cultures into two, that are not allowing people and wildlife to migrate back and forth, which is what's happened across the world. If you look at South Asia, that's a classic example of that. It is also about democratizing and localizing the economy. So the Dalit women farmers, when they say that seeds are ours, not Monsanto's or the government's, when workers in Thessaloniki in Greece say that the production processes should be in our hands and not in the hands of capitalist owner, it is about localization, it is about democratization, it is about self-reliance, it is about rebuilding relations beyond money in terms of caring and sharing, like the school example that I gave you earlier. The third crucial sphere would be social justice. None of this is going to be accessible to those who are currently marginalized, women in most communities, Dalits, so-called disabled people. There are people who've been marginalized for way too long. So the struggles for equality vis-a-vis these marginalized peoples are as much part of this transformation. Fourth is culture. In India, we have 780 living languages. Himachal Pradesh alone has 320 words for snow. Now, when every school in Himachal teaches only in Hindi, all the local languages will get wiped out, which means all the knowledge embedded within these 320 terms also gets wiped out, right? So, mother tongue teaching and learning has been talked about for a long time, but unfortunately, in India, most of the mother tongues are still ignored, right? So cultural and knowledge diversity, 6 different systems of medicine in India, or more probably. So why should allopathy be the only one that gets most of the budget? And finally, and most important, I think, is rebuilding our relations within nature. So rebuilding the sense of us being a cycle of life, not a pyramid where human beings are supposedly the most superior. If we are the most intelligent, I don't think we're showing it in the way we are running the planet, right? I think we're the most stupid. I just came back from watching the new dinosaur movie. And I think the scientist there actually says something similar, that if we are really the geniuses we're talking about, we're really making a mess of it. Um, and so, okay, this is what I was talking about in terms of challenging political boundaries. We could come back to this if somebody wants more. And finally, I think the center of the flower of transformation, the ethics and values. So it's not about copying what Dalit women farmers are doing in Telangana or what the Zapatistas are doing, but actually learning what principles do they use, what ethics are they, espousing, and from that trying to do something in our own areas, and then kind of saying, okay, how do we work together to create scale? There's this big question of scale. So I'm just putting up these values and ethics here for a few seconds. Just take a look. And again, this is something we can come back to in the discussion. But if you look at, for instance, that fourth bullet point, all the examples I'm telling you of transformation are where they work with cooperation and not competition, where it's about ideas and nature being in the commons and not privatized, right? Where if you look at the one in dark red, where it's not just about human rights, but the rights of all of nature. So with that, I think if one can actually think of all of these sorts of things, you're talking about worldview where the celebrity is not the richest person or the most powerful person or the most famous in different ways, but the person who actually sustains life, like that one Dalit woman farmer who sustains all of life by not using any chemicals and still being able to feed her family. Many such worldviews exist all over the world. In India, one of them, out of many, has been Swaraj, which has been around for many hundreds of years, which Gandhiji brought back during the independence struggle, and where basically he was saying it's not just about freedom from the British, it's about our individual and collective freedom, but in a way that does not undermine anybody else's freedom. So it's rights with responsibilities, freedoms with constraints, right? And we've kind of extended that to call it eco Swaraj, to say not just other people, but also other species. So whatever we do, we should do it if it is something we feel for our freedom and our benefit, but not in a way that it undermines anybody else or any other species. There are many similar worldviews across the world, some thousands of years old in Adivasi people, some very new, like degrowth in Europe, some very radical new interpretations of major religions, and a lot more. I mean, so the book that I'll show you at the end actually has 100 examples of these all across the world. And why we call it a pluriverse is because this is not it's not a universal solution. There are lots of different kinds of solutions, lots of ideologies, lots of technologies that would be relevant, especially in the site specific context. And then it's about really bringing them together. So in fact, we're saying, why even have universities? You should have pluriversities or multiversities where multiple knowledge systems are learned. And scale would then be about bringing it all together, creating horizontal networks of these fantastic movements of resistance and alternatives. And yeah, in a way, like if you look at the anti-patriarchal, the women's movement, the feminist movement, it's really thousands and millions of women and some men and other genders who have actually, in a sense, created scale without there being any one super organization doing it. So two attempts at trying to do that. One in India, which is called Vikalp Sangam, which Youth Alliance and many others are part of bringing these different radical alternatives across the country together. We meet physically for confluences. We do documentation of stories. So this website has about 2,000 stories of transformation, positive transformation. We do visioning of what kind of society we want, and then advocacy for policy shifts. And then learning from that, a global network also called the GTA, Global Tapestry of Alternatives, with similar to Vikalp Sangam networks in many other parts of the world. So again, just leaving this here, this was, I think, partly when I was doing a presentation with young people. I think most people on this call are probably youth, or hopefully, and certainly the Youth Alliance participants will be. So, I mean, I think the most important lesson I learned when I was doing what I was doing in high school and college was that none of us are too small to make a change. If we hadn't actually picked up that campaign at that point of time, perhaps the Delhi Ridge Forest wouldn't be there anymore. 7,000 hectares of forest in the middle of Delhi, right? It's not always so easy. We've had many failures also, but we have to do what we have to do, because it's, if we are passionate enough, we have to do it without worrying about, are we going to succeed? Are we too small, etc. These are some books and publications. I'm going to put up all the links in the chat. You can download these all in for PDFs for free. And you'll find a lot more case studies, stories, examples, visioning processes from India and from the rest of the world in these books and these websites. Okay, Aarti and Shipra, I think I'm done. I think it took a bit longer than I thought I would, but
Thank you.
hopefully I've given some sense of some amazing things
Thank you.
happening out there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ashish. Thank you for this presentation. They were like really powerful examples of what's happening and what like a simple thing or like people coming together can like really do and shift. And thank you for saying that line that none of us are small to make change. Like, so thank you for saying it. Um, I think I would like to. So I think it's 6:50 right now. We will have about 40 minutes for question and answers. I'll start with a couple of questions, and then we do have some space for others, for people here, for people who have joined here to ask questions. But I really want to start from something that I have been sitting with Ashish. When you started the presentation, there was a picture of an advertisement which says nature as a barrier, like people have started seeing as a barrier. And then over the presentation, you've talked about reverence with nature. Uh, so, and during the program in the last edition, Earth Shastra, and we do have a lot of rituals around, connection with nature, really feeling connected to the, like feeling that we are part of nature and not separate from it. But there was a point when one of the participants questioned about, are we commodifying nature? And I sometimes do still sit with that question, honestly. And so, what does reverence for nature mean to you? What and how has it shaped your life choices, and your journey?
Yeah, thanks. Um, I think very early on, for me, whether it was an interaction with a dog or a cat in my neighborhood, or uh, being out in a forest and watching or listening to, say, a bird, um, it was always more than the intellectual connection. It wasn't just the fact that, okay, this is a, I don't know, a red-tailed godwit or whatever it is. That's, the bird names. I was very confused when first some ornithologist gave me all the bird names. Now I know a little bit more. But for me, it wasn't really about that, or of course, the scientific knowledge about the fact that this is a migratory bird. All of that is important. I'm not denying that. It was much more the what was happening in my heart, so to say. It was much more the joy of actually being able to watch or listen to that bird, or joy of playing with a dog or a cat, which I'm sure many of you would have had an experience with, or some other animal. Or even with plants, for instance, watching how a young plant becomes a bigger one, or a sapling becomes a tree, and all the unfurling that happens. And I remember during COVID, I was sitting right now where I am in this room, and at that window behind me, there is a amalthas tree, a Cassia fistula tree. Oh, there I go with scientific names. So an amalthas tree, and the window was open. It was summer, no? Amalthas blooms in summer, in the heat of summer, and people were dying all over the country. There was a second wave of COVID. It was a really horrible time, right? And some amalthas flowers actually just blew into my room, petals. And I'm not a poet, but suddenly a poem came to me and I wrote it out. And I firmly believe that it was actually the Amalthas tree speaking to me and telling me to grieve. Of course, I must grieve, but to also process that grief in a particular way. So I have always felt that in some way nature is talking to me, and maybe I mean, the rest of nature is talking to me, and I'm talking to it. And Another example, and I think that's the photograph that you used in the poster, is 2 years back when I was in Kerala at the wonderful Atirapalli waterfall, and I was watching a group of bonnet macaques, monkeys, and I was taking photographs of this young baby monkey whose mother was also sitting behind. And at some point, I said, why am I putting a device in between myself and the animal, right? The baby was looking at me very intently, and I was obviously looking at it intently, but through my camera. So I put the camera down and I reached out. And there was a friend of mine who said, "Careful, the mother is there." And we know that monkeys, take some of these sorts of gestures with as aggression, so they can retaliate. So one has to be careful. But for some reason, I felt trust, and I reached out. My hand, the baby bent down and smelt my finger, and then reached out its own finger and touched mine. And that was a split second. Fortunately, my colleague Sujata was there to get a picture of it. Um, but for me, that was like I don't know. I mean, it was a moment of eternity. It was like, okay, all of life, all of evolution, if you want to think of it scientifically, but all of life, if you want to think of it spiritually, was encompassed in that one split second. If one can get that kind of feeling from even a plant in one's own garden or anything like that. One doesn't have to go to a tiger reserve for that. That is the connect that brings us back into the world of nature, that makes us humble again. Humility in the face of the incredible creativity of the rest of nature. Um, yeah, that to me, that's as or if not more important than knowing the scientific details of nature, which I'm not discounting. That's important. But I think this is way more important. This is why I think indigenous peoples are just so much wiser than we in our modern scientific ways of relating to the rest of nature, because they also name things, but for them it's much more than that. It's a relationship, it's a kinship. And so that kinship has to be brought back. How do we do that in our urban or industrialized worlds? I don't know all the answers, but I think the more exposure we have, especially for young children, the more it's possible.
Thank you. It is a beautiful picture. I mean, yeah, it really speaks about the connection. And yeah, I think some things are really felt at the heart and not always like understood intellectually. Like, so thank you for sharing that. Uh, I'm going to ask another question, but you can raise your hand if you have any questions to ask. Um,
It's going to
and
disappear. Going to switch on the lights.
sure. Yeah, okay. Neha is here, so maybe we can take a question from Neha.
Yep.
Go ahead, Neha.
Hi. Hello. First of all, Ashish, very thank you for this informative session. I really enjoyed looking at all the slides and all the pictures that you put up. I was also quickly trying to capture my screen so that I can just go back and see what are the forest schools all about and other things. So thank you very much for that. I'm glad.
I'm happy to, sorry, Neha, to interrupt you, but if anybody writes me a mail, I'm happy to share the whole presentation with you. There's no copyright on it, so please feel free to use it,
Yeah,
see it.
that thought did not come to my mind before you said copyright. Uh, all right. So, like, I do have a couple of questions, but one thing that intrigued me a lot about this presentation was there was this painting, I think, made by you below the volcano, and I saw that a lot was happening in that painting itself. Like, there was rain, and then there was like blocking of view, and I would like to believe that there is much, deeper meaning to all of that. And because it was for quite a short time, I could not comprehend it. And like, if you would be kind enough to like just go over that painting once, and then like, what did you see to, make that kind of a complex painting?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thanks for noticing that. It's one of those casual doodles that I did in COVID times while listening to interminable webinars. People thought I was taking notes, but actually I was doodling most of the time. So I'll just share it and okay. So can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, I mean, there was no pre-planning in this. It actually started off as just a bunch of, sort of coloring in like that mountain on the right-hand side, which became the volcano. I started with that, and then it kind of started evolving on its own. So what does it show? Well, it shows what I would call biocultural regionalism, which is to say, so that's a it's jargon, but basically I'm trying to show that okay, there are cultural, biological, ecological connections across large landscapes or seascapes, and that if we were to rebuild those connections or re-enable them to come back, then we would have a life in which there is incredible diversity. We would have a sort of landscape in which there's incredible diversity, both biological and cultural, ecological and cultural, where things are in relative harmony. It's not like there's complete harmony. There will still be tensions and conflicts, but relative harmony, where people are earning a livelihood. They're not like leaving nature alone in these, fenced tiger reserves kind of thing, but it's there's no fences. That there are some who are doing farming, that there are some who are doing walking, some who are doing bird watching or photography. And there's a whole bunch of wildlife which is also existing there. And there's also a dinosaur. So, so we can bring in some elements from the distant past. So yeah, I mean, and the different kinds of life is also important to actually be able to show that there is life under the ground, not just above it. That there's life in the water, not just above it. Because very often humans tend to only look at what's on the surface, right? And in fact, I haven't been able to show the sea here, that I've done separately in other drawings, but um, the oceans have most of Earth's life, and we've been totally neglecting them. Worse than neglecting, we've actually been destroying them. So yeah, and I'm leaving it open for you all to find your own meanings in it.
Yeah, one thing I noticed was the reason it kind of seems like a happy picture is because the population density of humans is quite comparable to other creatures over there. Uh, so good to see that. I don't want to take much of the time, but there is another question that I really wanted to ask you earlier was that you mentioned that in Gadchiroli, they have their own Gram Sabha for their own. And I was just wondering that if indigenous people care enough about, and I recently went to Gramya Manthan, so that idea is kind of fresh in me. So if people care about their own flora and fauna and their own systems of education, then why, like, what stops other communities to come up like them? Is it the state government? And I was even wondering, like, why is the state government not interfering for control? Because that's what it is, right? Taking control back or taking control over something. That's how
Yeah.
egotistical uh, aims actually arise. So,
Right. Yeah, no, thanks, Neha. Firstly, just a quick, I want to show you another image because you mentioned about population density. So I do realize that we also need to have some sort of balance between humans and the rest of nature in human dominated systems. So here's one that I also did around that time, which has much more density, as you can see, of humans, but nature also still survives. So you can actually think of even and in many parts of the world now, people are trying to reimagine and then rebuild cities in a way that natural corridors, wetlands, forest patches, etc., can actually come back or survive, so that you can have a lot more wildlife also in cities. But of course, beyond a point, human density will be destructive. So yeah, okay. Now, in terms of I think you basically asked two questions. One is why is it that other communities cannot make the same transformations, like with Gadchiroli ones, and also that is there not a pushback from the government? So with the first question, actually there are more and more communities who are getting inspired by, see, what we've done in the last few hundred years with colonialism and post-colonial centralized governments is we have destroyed people's self-confidence. People don't think they can actually do things for themselves. So it's always asking the government, please do this for us, please do that for us, right? And this is for all of us, more or less, right? Or most of us. So it's a very difficult thing. It actually takes a few years to rebuild that confidence in a community, and whether it's village or whether it's rural or urban. So that itself is something that kind of inhibits a lot of communities or a lot of civil society organizations from going in and trying to rebuild or help those villages to reconstruct. So that's one big thing. The second is that if you look at policies of support to communities, most of them are oriented towards pushing them further and further into the market, into the sort of market, and more corporatized economy. Yeah. And the destruction of their own traditional livelihood base. So if a community wants to do something different, which is, for instance, what the Gadchiroli community is doing or what the Dalit women farmers are doing, they're having to swim against the tide, and against a very powerful tide of market forces and the government policies. So These are two of many reasons. The third one, of course, also is that there's been so much brainwashing that within the village community itself, there'll be many people who are saying, no, 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 let's just bring the mining here because at least some of us will get jobs. Or let's just go, we also are young people saying, okay, no, we also want glitzy malls and big hospitals and things like that, right? It's not their fault. It's the way that the whole system has been brainwashing all of us. So this is why it becomes very difficult for communities to actually, for a much faster and wider spread of this kind of initiative. But it's happening now. The more we tell stories, the more we actually give these inspiring examples, the more we do videos and audio podcasts of these by the villagers themselves, by the communities themselves, the more others are waking up and saying, oh, if they could do it, maybe we can also. Yeah. So that's in the first question. The second one, no, yes, indeed, there is pushback. The example I gave you of the 90 villages with self-governance, currently they're facing huge problems because the government, the Maharashtra government is pushing the mining, which so far they've been able to stop. They're actually really, really pushing very hard. There's private corporate interests also involved. If you look at similar mobilization that happened in Chhattisgarh, etc., right now the movement is in huge trouble. Many of them are in prison. Some have been killed because you have very powerful corporations, including those who are friendly with our current prime minister, wanting to do mining there. So no, there is pushback. As soon as a movement becomes uncomfortable for those who are in power, there will be some form of attack, pushback, attempt to bribe, attempt to intimidate, and many other forms of trying to break the movement. And this is also why national and global networks of these movements are very, very important, because it's only then that if you not feel alone, you feel that there's 100 other groups all over the country who are with you, you're able to withstand those attacks better. You have access to lawyers who can maybe fight pro bono for you in your cases. You have access to media maybe who can carry your stories, which otherwise you wouldn't. You'd be alone, and then it would be very difficult to actually resist. So yeah, Neha, I hope I've answered your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ashish. That did answer my question, and I do have some takeaways to think about. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question from KP. KP, would you like to voice it or shall I read it? Maybe I can read it. So the question is, you said, yeah, hi Ashish, you said you uh, also do advocacy and policy. How do policymakers react to these ideas? How effective has it been so far?
Okay, thanks, KP. So around the time that I would say the first 15, 20 years of our work in Kalpavriksh and other networks, so that would be the 1970s and 80s. Our advocacy on policy shifts was much more effective than it is now, or that there was much more positive response than there is now. There were many reasons for this. There were people within government who were receptive, who were open to the idea, who themselves were actually worried about what was happening. This is especially the case with things like forests and wildlife and pollution. And there were many people in the judiciary who were actually also open to this. We got some fantastic judgments at that time from the Supreme Court or some of the high courts. We got many new laws. We got a department and then a Ministry of Environment. So many things were kind of happening at that time. If you look at post 1990s, especially with economic globalization coming in a big way, 1991 onwards, colleague and I have written a 400-page book analyzing this. I'll give the name in the chat. You actually begin to see that the push for economic globalization and very fast rates of economic growth, with a lot more of multinational corporations coming in and even Indian corporations becoming very big, that the ecological and human rights and labor rights gains that were made in the 1970s and 80s begin to be um, slowly whittled down or diluted. And this has been a process ever since then. And in the last 10 years, it's become much worse. Um, and also spaces within government for people like us have almost become zero. So if you look at it, there are many laws which mandate that some NGOs have to be on these government committees. But usually these are NGOs who are either former politicians of the same party or who are former heads of corporations or or who are NGOs who will not raise any dissenting voice. So people like me who may have been on these committees are no longer there. So in that sense, the space for policy advocacy has shrunk. The receptivity to policy advocacy has shrunk. And so we might still be doing it, but there is a much less of an appetite and a willingness within the governance structures to take these on board. What will be taken on board is if you do soft advocacy, if you do things like, okay, here's how you can do better recycling, or here's how you can plant more trees in a given area than what otherwise is possible, there's a lot of openness to that, or what is conventionally called sustainable development kind of stuff. If you look at CSR funds from corporations, if you have things like that, they'll be very happy to give you crores of rupees. But if you say, no, I want to do a campaign where I want to stop the destruction of 13,000 hectares of evergreen rainforest in Nicobar from a completely mad project, you're not going to get any funding from any CSR corporation, right? Or from government, obviously, and no support. So anyway, so the basically I'm making it too long, but to cut a long thing short, the spaces for policy advocacy are much less. Nevertheless, we do it because it's really important to do it, and we hope that some places, somewhere, some people are actually taking note of it. But equally important and more important is we keep supporting the strengthening of people's power on the ground. That ultimately is what will make the change happen.
Thank you. Ashish, as you were sharing and you were sharing, it was a bit, if if I would say, less difficult than it is now in policy and advocacy, or to change or to make change happen. Um, my question is then, what is that thing that can help you like stick to your commitments, your values, your, there are a lot of pressure uh, from dominant narratives about success, growth, life in a certain way. Like you said, a lot of us, maybe, or at least if I can speak for myself, during my young or in my school days and high school days, I also dreamed of like multi-story buildings, lights, all glittery things. And sometimes, some days the pressure comes in. So what do you think can sustain this work, or for me to like keep engaging with this tough path in a way, or less difficult or less easy path in a way?
Uh, um, well, firstly, not to be alone. I think doing this on one's own is very, very, very difficult. You'd have to be a completely mad person, mad in a good sense, to be able to do it alone, right? I think we all still have to be mad, but maybe not as. So I think having a group or multiple groups, having people who resonate with what you're doing and are also wanting to do something similar, is a really, really crucial thing. Secondly, I think less worrying about will I succeed in what I'm doing, and more the belief that if I'm passionate about doing something, I'm going to do it. I think that was Krishna's teaching in Bhagavad Gita, right? If I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, I mean, if you actually look at it, maybe most of the great religions in the world, or most of the great faiths in the world, or Adivasi belief systems, have actually said that, it's the step that you take, which you need to take, that is important, without worrying about what the consequences or the results might be. And this, I think, I've actually lived with that, which is why, for instance, out of every 10 campaigns we may have run, maybe we succeeded in only two or three, but the other six or seven do not make us so the two or three that might succeed, right? So I think that's a second crucial thing. If it's go for the passion and not for the results. Go for what needs to be done in your heart. This is what you think needs to be done, so do it. The third is having defense structures, which is to say, individually, one's own spiritual, intellectual, cultural defense, but also through these groups, to actually be able to have spaces of caring and sharing, where when you fail, when something gets worse, when you get up in the morning and read another 500 children have been killed in Gaza or whatever, you are able to go through the rest of the day because you have that individual and collective spiritual, cultural, intellectual strength. This is really, really, really important, right? Now, how does one build that? And this is the challenge of all of us for our groups and our collectivities. How do we help each other to actually build that kind of strength, that kind of resilience to be able to go on? Fourth, this is in no order of priority, okay? Fourth, always try and work in with, learn from communities who are struggling and who are actually smiling even in the midst of the hardest situations they might be in, right? And fifth, maybe for me the most important, always take hope and inspiration from the rest of nature. So always, whenever I go out for a workshop meeting, whatever, like when I came to Youth Alliance last time, I spent 3-4 days just doing my own bird watching and things like that. So I guess these are some of the things that at least they've helped me. I don't know how much of these will help each of you. And I'm sure many of you will have other ways by which you can be resilient and hopeful.
Thank you. Yeah, can resonate with what you shared, and especially the the individual, but also the collective group who can like work together throughout what's happening for us, within us, and outside. We also had one more person raising their hand. You can unmute yourself. I can't see it anymore. Okay,
Sanskriti.
Sanskriti.
Yeah, hi. Um, should we take the other questions first? Like there was some question in the chat also. So
There's one from Kaushik Singh. Let me read it. So it says, for those who are young and students who are willing to participate in the activism that people like you are doing, how do you suggest they get started? Especially from those who come from backward rural region who have very minimal resources. Yeah, thanks, Kaushik. That's an important question. So I think we need to build a sort of a resource base or database across the entire networks of the groups that we're involved in, for instance, Vikalp Sangam, which can give young people the options that they have available. That if they're in Madhya Pradesh, for instance, what are the sorts of groups where they can actually go and volunteer or maybe even get a job in the kind of thing that they want to do. And as you said, this is especially important for those who come from rural areas and don't have the kind of privileges and so on that like somebody like me has. So I think we need to be able to do that. There are now literally hundreds of organizations and groups which are opening themselves up to these kinds of volunteer or paid jobs. It's not easy. It's not like everybody is going to be able to get something very quickly, but they are available. So I think it would be for a young person would be to try and search for these sorts of places, for databases and resource lists that are available, and then basically just approach them. Um, and also maybe to kind of look at stories. So this is why the Vikalp Sangam website, as I said, has 2,000 stories in mostly, unfortunately, English or Hindi, but also now more and more languages are coming in. So they could also be looking for those stories and maybe go and visit them and then see, what inspires them and how they could get involved. Suhastais is a comment, and I agree with that. That was actually also in my slide on what one can do. Very, very important for people, whether you're students or whatever, young professionals, um, to see how you can use your talents to support local movements. It could be wherever you're based, it could be somewhere elsewhere. Maybe during vacations, actually go and visit some of these movements, help them to document their story. Even just being there is a big moral support for a lot of these moments. And then try and bring some of that flavor back into the college or the school, and ask your teachers, why are we not learning about these movements? Why do we only learn about what McKinsey and Ernst and Young are doing? Why don't we learn about what Narmada Bachao Andolan or Beach Bachao Andolan or any of these are doing? Which at some point actually were put into a lot of the textbooks, but most of them have been taken out now. NCRT textbooks. So Astai, thanks. Sanskriti.
yeah, I think so. My question was, I think you were talking about like the intersectionality of different areas, personal, cultural, etc. And so I think like so, and you also spoke about how there have been many I mean, noble people in the world and noble causes that have like helped our society, but in a more structured way, like so, like the Narmada Bachao Andolan or the Chipko movement and all. But now, like, and you have also been working for so long in this area, but I think now, like for currently, like how can we expand this in a more structured way in terms of like so I think I think like for example like even in education, like you were saying, education is mostly for the head. How can we kind of also have education, I mean, bring it in our education? So like I think there is a lot of a much more awareness about mental health now, and there are a lot of educational resources available, and just overall that movement has taken up has come up. But I think for spirituality or like something like that, and in my journey I have found a few sources, but like yeah, is there like a knowledge resource other than the ones that are currently being taught in schools, like be used to kind of spearhead this movement faster or in a better way?
Yes, I mean, there are many. How to get schools and colleges to use them is the bigger challenge. Like, I mean, now, in fact, many colleges or universities are using the stories that I just mentioned on the Vikalp Sangam website. We have more than 100 films, which are increasingly being used in university and school level. But it's always dependent on there being one or two faculty members who are interested and who get to know about it and then say, oh, let's use this as a resource. So the challenge actually is, first of all, how to get all these institutions to even know that there are resources like that, and then identify a few faculty members or a principal or whoever who's actually interested in taking this forward. Because as you know, unfortunately, the education system is it's not just so bad for students, it's so bad for teachers, probably even worse for teachers, because they have to teach incredible loads of, I mean, their workload is huge. And they themselves, through their B.Ed and all of that, they get trained in a way that it's very, it's rote learning and rote teaching. And they're not encouraged to be creative and innovative. And in fact, there's a lot of resistance to be creative and innovative because it means more work. People think it means more work. So, so that's the challenge. How do we get it across? We have actually just been discussing with somebody in IIT Delhi who has access to 4,000 institutions of higher learning, so-called higher learning in India, is to please get, at least even if nothing else, get this website across to all these institutions. Maybe out of 4,000, 100 will use them or 200 will use them, but at least they will know. That's one. Secondly, we need a lot more storytelling in various forms: audio, visual, article, whatever different forms, art forms, music, um, because that's what gets across to people. It's not so much the intellectual stuff. It's really much more about emotional content, emotional plus intellectual comment. It's about not so much about facts, but about stories. How did a transformation happen? Why did that person, that Dalit woman farmer, for instance, do what she did? So this is also lacking, severely lacking, and especially non-article form, audiovisual form. So we need much more. Any of you has talents on that front, please get in touch. We'd love to work with you on that. Art, different kinds of arts. We're actually now trying to get some musicians to begin to put a lot of these alternative stories into music form, folk music and other forms of music, rap music, whatever. And we're actually also having an art sangam in probably in December, where we'll hope to bring 20, 30 artists from different genres to come together and sort of think through this and create stuff. So all of this needs to be done to be able to reach across to people. I'm told, for instance, 30-second shorts reach people much more than 20-minute films. I don't know. I mean, this keeps changing, right? Every 5 years it changes as to what really reaches across. So I'm totally confused. But you people will know that better. So now we have a 40-minute film called Churning the Earth, which has 7 fantastic examples of alternatives all over India. I've put that link in the chat. People are saying 40 minutes, great. It might be good for a classroom, but most people won't see that long. So now they're making 30-second shorts from those 40 minutes, which will then lead to the longer film. And we're also making a 20-minute version of it. And we're doing a multi-language version, and we're doing a graphic novel, etc., etc. So, I mean, we're just trying everything possible. But we need many, 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 many more people actually doing this kind of stuff to have that outreach. and for people to know that these resources do exist.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. And Vikalp Sangam website has a lot of stories about different experiments, different things going that's been documented by Ashish and his colleagues and friends uh, who have documented the grassroots experiments happening around different domains, be it education, agriculture, decentralization of power, and many more. I'm looking if there are any more questions.
One from
Mm,
Spoor.
Yeah, there are two actually, one from Meera and from Spoon.
Yeah, so Meera, thanks a lot. So Meera and I are actually in touch on email. So I think we should just continue that conversation. If there are financial resources available, where they should be channelized to, in so that they're used in the best possible manner. And of course, we also have huge issues of foreign funding, FCRA, all that kind of stuff. So one has to carefully discuss that. But thanks for that. Spurti's question, let me see.
I can
Oops,
read it out.
I lost it.
Hello everyone. The session was wonderful and I love the idea of how nature is you and yourself. Thanks for helping. But I want to know how to convince others who don't value nature and the idea of life and her idea of life.
Uh, Gandhiji once said, you can wake up a person who's sleeping, but not somebody who's pretending to sleep. So, if the kind of people you're talking about are people who actually do know but are refusing to know, I don't have an answer for that. But if these are people who actually simply don't know that there is a wonderful world out there because they've never been exposed to it. They've never actually been taken out and shown some beautiful insects in the garden, especially as possible as young an age as possible, but even older people. Um, and not I'm not just talking about David Attenborough documentaries, which are also wonderful, but actually being out in contact with nature. So if you can convince them to come out and actually have ways of explaining how that butterfly in the garden might be connected to us, or why that butterfly is interesting, important, beautiful, lovely, etc. Maybe two or three more out of 10 people that you try this with will actually resonate with what we're saying. That exposure is very, very, very important, and what form of exposure that is. And also being able to, I mean, if you tell them, okay, let's go to a tiger reserve 400 kilometers away, chances are they're going to say, forget it, I'd much rather sit at home and watch Netflix. But if you say, okay, come out with me for 15 minutes into the near park, maybe you might make some breakthroughs of that kind. It's also interesting that how many people respond to domestic animals. Um, and it's from that, it's not such a long leap to actually begin to respond to wild animals. Most people that I know will respond to a dog or a cat or something like that, responding not necessarily like fawn over them and say, oh, chiku and all of that, but at least have some kind of at least some response, right? And from there to then be able to take them out and show something in the wild is a leap, but it's not that big a leap. Now, of course, you're still going to find people who are like completely hostile to all animals. That's going to be a bit more difficult. Maybe then you try through plants. I don't know, but but I think for a lot of people, it's just the fact that that exposure has never happened, and this is why education needs to change. It desperately needs to change, so that young kids are learning outside the classroom, in wherever they are, in a farm, in a forest, at the coast or near a river. I'll just give you an example and then I'll stop. We were with school children up in Ladakh, uh, who have a village in a village next to the Indus River. And my colleague Shrishti had a session with them on the rights of rivers. And she said, okay, what are the rights you have as kids? So they said, we have the right to learn, the right to laugh, the right to, etc., eat, drink. Then she said, oh, what do you think the river's rights are? So they were like a little foxed initially. Then they started actually saying, oh yeah, the river Indus should be allowed to flow freely. Then one girl said she should have the right to sing. So we were like, I mean, neither Shrishti nor I had actually thought of that earlier. So is it meaning what? No, she gurgles sometimes, she splashes some other time, she has so many different sounds, and nobody should take that right away. So if you, if children are actually exposed to the rest of nature as kids, I think that sensitivity would be much, much greater than is otherwise the case. And getting them away from screens and you know those whatever gadgets, which is of course also a big challenge, but I think it's possible.
Um, Ashish, thank you for the answer. It's already 7:30. Will you be able to extend 10 minutes? I have one last question and another 5 minutes to close. Will that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
I wanted to ask the question that I wanted to ask while we were looking at the presentation and the values and the principles of values and principle, if I'm putting the words slightly. Apart from many things, the last thing was fun. And when we talk about crisis and systemic crisis and issues around inequality, discrimination and all, what is the role of fun or joy into all of it? And it was quite interesting. I haven't seen this for the first time. I've seen this before also, but just to seeing fun there really brings a lot of warmth to me. So I just wanted to know what made you and your team and all those who worked on Flower of Transformation made, like, put it there into the values.
So here's a secret, and you'll be even happier to hear this. In 2016 or 17, we had the first youth Vikalp Sangam in Bhopal. And we had put up an initial set of values, which was all the serious stuff above that one. And it was actually you young people who said, hey, listen, this is all fine, but it's too serious. Where's the enjoyment? So that's how that got added. But I for some reason, I never thought of putting it there, but I always believed in it. I mean, I think whatever we're doing, we need to find the spaces for laughter, the spaces for excitement, creative excitement, the spaces for that sort of quiet pleasure that you have when you're listening to a nice friend or having coffee with a nice friend or listening to a bird in the forest. Um, those spaces of enjoyment, which are much more than frivolous fun, they actually, they're spaces of pleasure and enjoyment, really deep enjoyment, are as much a part of a serious movement as the serious dialogues and thinking and intellectual stuff and all of that, right? I think it was it Margaret Mead? No, I forget now who it was who said, one of the revolutionary feminists who actually said that if there's no dancing, I'm not part of the revolution. And what's the point of revolution if there isn't dancing and music and singing? So, to me, radical enjoyment, just like radical love, is a really crucial foundation of any transformation that we want. If we're going to be depressed while we're doing whatever we want to, and if we're just all the time serious, I don't think we're going to get where we want to get to. So this does not mean that we're always laughing, obviously, that we're always enjoying ourselves and whatever. There are moments of grief. I just mentioned, for instance, where, the Yamaltas tree told me that, of course, you must grieve. I'm not telling you not to grieve. But that grief needs to be within a context of also having hope and also having inspiration and also having the laughter, right? So that's how I would say that actually right now it's at the end. Maybe I should next time onwards put it right on top. It's very, very important.
Thank you so much. It was
Emma Gold, yes, thank you. Thank you for putting that in chat, Archana.
yeah, it was really nice to listen. I mean, this is my first time of listening. If I can't dance, I don't want to be in your evolution. And it's such a beautiful and powerful line. Like, I will like remember it forever. It feels like that. So thank you so much, Ashish, for the time. It was really nourishing and nurturing to listen. Uh, in today's times, when half of the newspaper or half of the media channels are just bantering each other, attacking, and like it feels like everything is falling apart and shattering. This webinar was really helpful to like see this ray of light and hope, and like believe that no act is small if one has intention to change. And everything, while doing everything, one must also know that they're doing it out of passion and love and joy of it and not just feeling depressed with it. So thank you for doing and sharing all of this with us. In the last 5 minutes, I want to take your time. First of all, thank you for the patience and staying here. I will really request you to be here along with us for another 5 minutes. I'm also here to share about one of a beautiful program that I, Shipra from the team and Youth Alliance create, which is Earth Shastra. Ashish has been a mentor before, and he has come as a mentor before in seventh edition of the program. The program is basically about how to see economy and ecology as a connected, or how to see the intersection of economy and ecology, कि वो दोनों separate नहीं है, they're not separate, and we do so by like really in two parts. First is sitting with the crisis. What is the crisis? What is, when we say a lot of economic growth, where does it come from? What fuels it? uh, what does development mean? What is the definition of development? We really deconstruct such, I would say, themes and topics that's been prevalent in the mainstream society about consumption, about product, about marketing, uh, about education. Like Ashish shared before, education needs to change. The mainstream factory-based education, we really deconstruct all of that. Really see the interconnection. कि एक दूसरे से connected कैसे हैं? These are not sitting in silos. These are all connected and hence creating the meta crisis or the bigger crisis that we are part of or are living in today's times with alienation, depression, and all of that, which is also a way of making us feel very disconnected from each other. And in the second part of the program, we actually look at to the thing that we discussed at the start of this webinar, the reverence for nature. How do I start feeling, embodying, really understanding that I am nature. I'm not like a separate part of it. I am in a way a part of the larger nature, and how can I build that reconnection? And from there we also talk about, like we discussed, the alternatives. Ki, okay, now how to respond to the what we have learned and what we have made sense of. So the program is going to happen in Satstal, which is in Uttarakhand, from 31st August to 7th September. It's an 8-day immersive leadership journey. Uh, and with the intent of like the three things, and like Ashish shared, it's also to talk about the content or the crisis that we are part in, but also to do all of that while really really enjoying, like feel getting a sense of community. So we are looking at the systemic lens and the global picture and all the crisis, but also really doing it not just out of I would say कि क्रोध से नहीं करे. क्रोध important है, like anger is important. I'm not denying the role of anger in it, but how can we do it with more, like really getting a sense of belonging to each other, really getting a sense of community from community, like really enjoying and dancing together, like really celebrating rituals which are important to have that reverence for nature, to feel more connected to the mother earth and more. um Shipra, my colleague, is here. She will be putting some links on the chat. uh Shipra, anything you would like to add?
No, just that I've put some links on the chat, and like Ashish was sharing, it's not all in the head, it's like it's a body experience, working with our hands, working with our heart. And I think just embodying that, all of that in our program, I mean, while hearing it also was like, oh wow, like it is important. And I was also sitting with the question, ये alternatives हैं, but my life, my education has not been to look at alternatives or look at or imagine a world or a different world that it can be possible, that I can create something. But so where do I go? Where do I start? So I was just thinking, sometimes my body, or there is an inherent thing which is not so trained, or इतना calculated नहीं है, that will also lead for me for some answers, and also definitely learning from such places, such alternatives. And we also visit one in our Shastra, like at least, talk about some, and also have like a experience of one of it in this edition. Yeah, just that.
Thank you. With that, I officially close the webinar. Thank you, Ashish, once again. But I and Shipra will be here for another 5 minutes in case if you have any more questions. We have On the chat, we have shared links to different things, also email ID. Ashish has already shared his email ID. Feel free, I'm speaking for Ashish, but feel free to reach out to him if you want to have more longer discussions and conversations about the theme we discussed today. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Arti, Shipra, everybody else. So I'll drop off now. Thanks,
Thank
and we'll all be in touch. Thank you.
thank you, Ashish. Take care.
Bye.